A routine visit turned sour. The bustling streets of Manhattan roared with life as Elena Brooks navigated her way through the financial district. The towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over the pristine sidewalks, where hurried executives brushed past tourists snapping photos of iconic landmarks. Amid the chaos, Union Savings Bank stood as a symbol of exclusivity and privilege, its sleek glass facade reflecting the opulence of the city. Elena, a 36-year-old entrepreneur, had built her success from the ground up. Her chain of gourmet coffee shops had become a staple across New York City, attracting high-profile clients and garnering accolades for its exceptional service and innovative flavors. But despite her achievements, Elena was no stranger to the unspoken challenges that came with being a black woman in predominantly white, high-powered spaces. Dressed in a tailored gray dress and carrying a subtle leather handbag, Elena walked into the bank with an air of quiet confidence. Today, she was here to deposit a significant sum of money, a payment from a major client that she intended to reinvest into her business. The bag at her side contained neatly stacked bills, each accounted for with meticulous precision. The bank's interior was a picture of modern minimalism, marble floors, muted tones, and soft lighting that gave the space an air of sophistication. Executives in tailored suits filled the space, their polished shoes clicking against the floor as they hurried to their next appointments. Elena took a seat in one of the sleek chairs near the counter, her presence drawing subtle glances from other clients and employees. She was used to it by now, the curious, and sometimes judgmental, stares that followed her in spaces like this. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the teller counter where Stephen Myers, a middle-aged white man with a stern demeanor, worked methodically. Stephen had a reputation for his rigid adherence to the bank's protocols, often taking a more critical approach with customers who didn't fit the bank's ideal image. Elena had encountered people like Stephen before, people who mistook her polished exterior for an anomaly or treated her success as a fluke. When her turn came, Elena approached the counter with a polite smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm and professional. "I'd like to make a deposit into my business account." Stephen glanced up briefly, his eyes flicking over her before returning to his computer screen. "ID and account information, please," he said, his tone devoid of friendliness. Elena handed over her ID and account details without hesitation, her posture relaxed but composed. As Stephen typed her information into the system, his eyes drifted to the leather handbag she had placed on the counter. The bulge of cash inside caught his attention, and his expression tightened. "That's a lot of cash to be carrying around," Stephen remarked, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Don't you think that's a bit unusual?" Elena met his gaze calmly. "It might be for some people, but it's common for a business like mine," she replied, her voice steady. Stephen's lips pressed into a thin line as he opened the bag, revealing the neatly stacked bills. He began counting the money, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he were searching for something to validate his suspicions. The tension in the air was palpable, but Elena remained composed, refusing to let his demeanor rattle her. Halfway through the count, Stephen paused, holding up a few bills. His eyes narrowed as he scrutinized them, and then he glanced at Elena with a look that could only be described as disdain. "This looks suspicious," he said, his words cutting through the hum of activity in the bank. Elena's brow furrowed. "Suspicious? What do you mean?" Stephen held the bills up again, as if to emphasize his point. "Dark money isn't accepted here. We don't process dirty cash in this bank." The words hit Elena like a slap. For a moment, she was too stunned to respond. "Are you insinuating that my money is dirty?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Stephen shrugged, his expression unyielding. "We need to verify the legitimacy of this amount. We can't just take anything." Elena took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had worked too hard to be treated with such blatant disrespect, and she wasn't about to let this slide. "Verify its legitimacy," she repeated, her tone sharpening. "I'm here as a client with valid documentation, an active business account, and a spotless history. What more do you need?" Stephen's smirk was faint but unmistakable. Just following protocol, ma'am. Elena's eyes narrowed. Fine, she said, her voice cold and deliberate. Let's follow protocol. Call your manager. Now. Stephen hesitated for a fraction of a second before reluctantly picking up the phone. Within minutes, the branch manager, Michael Hayes, appeared. A man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and a carefully practiced friendly demeanor, Michael approached the counter with a polite smile. Is there a problem here? He asked, glancing between Elena and Stephen. Elena straightened her posture, her gaze steady. Yes, there is, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Your employee just insinuated that my money is dirty and that he needs to verify its legitimacy before accepting my deposit. I've provided all necessary documentation, yet I'm being treated with suspicion. I'd like to know why. Michael's smile faltered slightly as he turned to Stephen, who was already preparing his defense. I'm just following protocol, sir, Stephen began. It's an unusual amount, and I thought it prudent to. And nothing, Elena interjected, her tone cutting through Stephen's excuses. You decided, for some reason, that I don't belong here. It's obvious. Michael raised a hand, trying to defuse the situation. Miss Brooks, I can assure you. I want this documented, Elena said firmly, her voice carrying an edge of steel. I want it on record that I was accused of attempting to deposit dirty money based on nothing but assumptions and prejudice. The hum of activity in the bank had quieted as clients and employees alike turned their attention to the unfolding scene. Elena could feel their eyes on her, but she refused to back down. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was standing against a system that allowed people like Stephen to wield their biases unchecked. Michael's expression grew more serious as he realized the gravity of the situation. Miss Brooks, please, let's step into my office to discuss this further. Elena's gaze didn't waver. I'll discuss this with you, but only if it's clear that this incident will be addressed and rectified. I will not be dismissed. Michael nodded, gesturing for her to follow him. As they walked toward his office, Elena felt a surge of determination. She hadn't asked for this fight, but now that it was here, she intended to see it through to the end. A stand for dignity. As Elena followed Michael Hayes into his office, the murmurs in the bank lobby grew louder. Customers and employees exchanged glances, some shocked by the confrontation they had just witnessed, while others whispered their judgments. But Elena didn't care about the stares or the hushed conversations. Her focus was on holding the bank accountable for the disrespect she had endured. Michael's office was a sleek, minimalist space, with a large glass desk and a wall of awards and accolades behind it. It was clear he took pride in maintaining the bank's image as a top-tier institution. He gestured for Elena to take a seat across from him, his expression carefully composed. Miss Brooks, he began, his tone measured, I want to start by apologizing for any inconvenience you've experienced today. I assure you that this bank values all of our clients equally. Elena raised an eyebrow, her arms crossed. If that were true, we wouldn't be having this conversation, she replied, her voice calm but firm. Your teller not only questioned the legitimacy of my money but insinuated that it was dirty. That wasn't just an inconvenience, it was blatant disrespect. Michael nodded slowly, leaning forward. I understand your frustration, and I'll ensure that this situation is addressed. Stephen was simply following protocol. Let me stop you right there, Elena interrupted, her gaze sharp. Don't insult my intelligence by hiding behind the word protocol. I'm a businesswoman. I've dealt with banks across this city, and I know how they operate. What Stephen did wasn't about protocol, it was about prejudice. Michael hesitated, clearly weighing his next words carefully. Miss Brooks, I want you to know that we take incidents like this very seriously. If you'll allow me to investigate further, I'll make sure Stephen's actions are reviewed and any necessary steps are taken. Elena leaned forward, her tone unwavering. What I want is more than just an investigation. I want accountability. I want an acknowledgement that what happened today was wrong, and I want to know what steps this bank will take to ensure it doesn't happen again, not just to me, but to anyone." Michael's composure faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "You have my word that this matter will be handled appropriately." As the meeting continued, Elena outlined her concerns with clarity and precision. She spoke about the systemic biases that people of color faced in professional environments, highlighting how such attitudes were not only harmful but also damaging to the bank's reputation. Michael listened attentively, occasionally jotting down notes, though Elena couldn't tell whether he was genuinely engaged or simply trying to placate her. By the time the meeting ended, Michael assured Elena that he would personally oversee the review of the incident and follow up with her directly. But Elena wasn't entirely convinced. She had heard promises like this before, vague assurances that often led to minimal action. As she left his office, her resolve hardened. If the bank thought this issue would quietly fade away, they were sorely mistaken. When Elena returned to the lobby, she was met with a mixture of reactions. Some customers averted their eyes, clearly uncomfortable, while others offered her subtle nods of support. Stephen stood stiffly behind the counter, avoiding her gaze as he continued assisting other clients. Elena didn't spare him a glance as she walked past, her head held high. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy. Elena took a moment to gather her thoughts, breathing in the crisp air as taxis honked and pedestrians hurried past. She knew this wasn't just about her, it was about every person who had been dismissed, disrespected, or made to feel like they didn't belong in spaces where they had every right to be. She decided then and there that she wouldn't let the matter rest. A network of support. That evening, Elena sat at her dining table, the soft glow of her laptop illuminating her determined expression. She began drafting a detailed email recounting the incident, addressing it to the bank's corporate headquarters. She included every detail, Stephen's condescending remarks, the assumptions he had made about her, and the lack of immediate accountability from the bank's management. But she didn't stop there. Elena also reached out to her network of fellow entrepreneurs, many of whom had shared similar stories of discrimination in professional settings. Within hours, her inbox was flooded with messages of support and outrage. One of the replies came from Marcus Reynolds, a prominent lawyer and longtime family friend. "Elena," his message read, "this is unacceptable. If you're open to it, I'd be happy to help you draft a formal complaint and ensure it gets the attention it deserves." Elena didn't hesitate to accept his offer. Together, they crafted a compelling letter, not only addressing the incident but also calling for systemic changes within the bank's policies. They demanded better training for employees, transparency in handling customer complaints, and a public acknowledgement of the issue. The power of social media. While Marcus worked on the legal side, Elena turned to social media to share her story. She carefully composed a post detailing what had happened, emphasizing the broader implications of such behavior. Her tone was measured but powerful, calling for accountability and highlighting the importance of treating every customer with respect, regardless of their background. By morning, her post had gone viral. Thousands of people shared it, leaving comments of support and sharing their own experiences with discrimination in similar settings. The hashtag #RespectInBanking began trending, drawing attention from local news outlets and sparking conversations about bias in professional environments. The sudden influx of public attention put the bank in an uncomfortable position. By midday, Union Savings Bank's official account had issued a statement, expressing regret over the incident and promising a thorough investigation. But for many, including Elena, the statement rang hollow, an attempt to manage PR rather than address the root of the problem. An unexpected ally. Amid the chaos, Elena received a call from someone she hadn't expected, Michael Hayes. "Miss Brooks," he began, his voice sounding more measured than it had in their initial meeting. "I wanted to thank you for bringing this issue to light. I've been with this bank for over 2 decades, and while I'd like to believe we've built a culture of professionalism, it's clear we still have a long way to go. Elena listened, skeptical but intrigued. "What are you saying, Mr. Hayes?" "I'm saying that I've reviewed the incident, and I agree with you. Stephen's behavior was unacceptable, and we've taken immediate action to address it. But more importantly, I want to work with you to ensure this becomes a turning point for our bank. We need to do better, not just in words, but in action." Elena was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "I appreciate the sentiment," she said finally. "But sentiment isn't enough. I want to see real change." "You will," Michael promised. "We're scheduling diversity and inclusion training for all employees. Effective immediately. And I'd like to invite you to be part of that process, to share your perspective and help us create meaningful change." It wasn't the resolution Elena had anticipated, but it was a step in the right direction. She agreed to meet with Michael again, cautiously optimistic that this could lead to something greater than herself. As she ended the call, Elena felt a spark of hope. The fight was far from over, but she was ready to see it through, because this wasn't just about one incident at a bank. It was about paving the way for a future where everyone was treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. The spark of accountability. Elena sat in her apartment the next day, reflecting on the events that had unfolded at the bank. Her social media post had spread like wildfire, amassing thousands of shares and comments. People from across the country reached out to share their own stories of bias and discrimination. Some were eerily similar to hers, while others highlighted different facets of a systemic problem. The overwhelming response confirmed what Elena already knew: her experience wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger issue that demanded attention. Her phone buzzed incessantly, notifications flooding her screen. Among them was a message from an unexpected sender, Michael Hayes, the branch manager from Union Savings Bank. He wanted to arrange a follow-up meeting to discuss potential changes within the bank. While Elena appreciated the gesture, she remained skeptical. Words were easy to say, but meaningful action was harder to deliver. Determined to keep the pressure on, Elena began compiling evidence. She gathered screenshots of the online responses, highlighting the scope of the issue, and prepared a document outlining actionable steps the bank could take to address systemic bias. Her goal was clear: to ensure her case became a catalyst for lasting change. A meeting with Marcus. That afternoon, Elena met with Marcus Reynolds, her lawyer and family friend. They sat across from each other in his spacious office, the walls lined with books and framed accolades. Marcus had been following the situation closely and was impressed by the momentum Elena had generated. "This is bigger than just you and Stephen," Marcus said, tapping his pen against a notepad. "What you're doing has the potential to spark a movement. But we need to make sure the bank understands the gravity of the situation." Elena nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I don't just want an apology or a quick fix. I want real accountability. Policies need to change, and employees need to be educated. This can't happen to someone else." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've got a strong case for a formal complaint. But with the public attention this has garnered, you also have leverage. Use it wisely." Together, they drafted a formal letter addressed to Union Savings Bank's corporate headquarters. The letter detailed the incident, called out the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to occur, and demanded a public acknowledgement as well as actionable steps to prevent future discrimination. They also included a request for a meeting with senior executives, ensuring Elena's voice would be heard at the highest level. The public response. As days passed, the story continued to gain traction. Local news outlets picked it up, interviewing Elena about her experience. Her calm, articulate demeanor and her clear message resonated with audiences. She emphasized the need for systemic change rather than focusing solely on her personal grievance, which earned her widespread respect. One evening, as she scrolled through her emails, she noticed a message from a reporter at a national news network. They wanted to feature her story as part of a segment on workplace discrimination. Elena hesitated for a moment, wondering if she was ready to take her fight to a national stage. But then she thought about the countless people who had shared their stories with her, and the answer became clear. The interview aired 2 days later. Elena spoke passionately about her experience, framing it as a reflection of broader societal issues. She didn't just call out Union Savings Bank, she called on all institutions to do better. Her words struck a chord, sparking conversations across social media and prompting other organizations to examine their own practices. Inside the bank. While Elena's story gained momentum, tensions rose within Union Savings Bank. Employees whispered about the incident, some siding with Stephen and others condemning his behavior. Stephen himself had grown defensive, insisting he was simply doing his job, but the scrutiny from management was unavoidable. Michael Hayes, the branch manager, found himself in an unenviable position. He knew the bank's reputation was on the line, and Elena's growing influence only increased the stakes. He had spent hours in meetings with corporate executives, discussing how to address the situation without further damaging their public image. But Michael also felt a personal responsibility to make things right. He couldn't deny that Stephen's actions had been wrong, and he realized the bank's existing policies were inadequate for addressing such biases. In a rare moment of introspection, Michael reviewed the bank's training materials. What he found shocked him. The guidelines were outdated, vague, and focused more on compliance than on fostering an inclusive and respectful environment. It was clear to him that the problem went far beyond Stephen, it was a failure of the institution as a whole. The second meeting. A week after the initial incident, Elena returned to the bank for her follow-up meeting with Michael Hayes. This time, she was accompanied by Marcus, whose presence added an air of authority to the proceedings. They were led into a conference room, where Michael and a representative from the bank's corporate office awaited them. Michael stood as they entered, extending a hand. "Miss Brooks, Mr. Reynolds, thank you for coming. We appreciate your willingness to have this conversation." Elena shook his hand but remained guarded. "Let's hope it's more than just a conversation," she replied. The meeting began with Michael reiterating the bank's regret over the incident and their commitment to addressing it. The corporate representative, a woman named Linda, echoed his sentiments, outlining a series of steps the bank planned to take, including mandatory diversity training for all employees and a review of their internal policies. Elena listened carefully, nodding occasionally but interjecting when necessary. "Training is a start," she said. "But it needs to be more than a one-time session. This has to be an ongoing effort, with accountability at every level." Linda took notes, acknowledging Elena's points. "You're absolutely right," she said. "We're also considering creating a customer advisory board to provide feedback on our services and ensure we're meeting the needs of all our clients. Would you be interested in joining?" Elena was momentarily taken aback but quickly recovered. "I'd be open to it, provided it's more than just a token gesture. I want to see measurable progress." By the end of the meeting, Elena felt cautiously optimistic. While she knew words could only go so far, the willingness of the bank's representatives to listen and engage gave her a glimmer of hope. As she and Marcus left the conference room, she glanced back at Michael, who met her gaze with what seemed like genuine respect. A turning point. Later that evening, Elena received a call from Michael. His voice was softer, less formal than before. "Miss Brooks," he began, "I just wanted to thank you. Not just for holding us accountable, but for giving us the chance to improve. You've opened my eyes to things I hadn't fully considered, and I want you to know I'm committed to making real changes here." Elena appreciated the sentiment but remained grounded. "Thank you, Michael. But the real work is just beginning. Words are easy, actions matter." Michael agreed, and as Elena ended the call, she felt a sense of satisfaction. The battle wasn't over, but she had taken the first steps toward creating a future where no one would have to endure what she had. As she sat in her apartment, her phone buzzed with another notification. This time, it was a message from a young entrepreneur who had seen her interview. Thank you for speaking up, it read. You've inspired me to stand up for myself, too. Elena smiled, her determination renewed. This was why she fought, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Turning the tables. The morning light poured through the windows of Elena's apartment as she sipped her coffee and scanned her phone. Notifications were still flooding in, messages of support, stories from others who had faced discrimination, and a growing number of inquiries from reporters. Her story had struck a nerve, igniting a broader conversation about bias and respect in professional settings. But Elena wasn't one to bask in attention. She was focused on the next steps. She understood that sparking dialogue was only the beginning. Real change would require strategy, persistence, and unwavering resolve. A larger platform. That afternoon, Elena received a call from a well-known advocacy organization dedicated to promoting equity and inclusion in workplaces. The representative, a woman named Sophia Carter, had been following Elena's story and was impressed by the way she had handled herself. Elena, Sophia began warmly, what you're doing is extraordinary. Stories like yours are catalysts for change. We'd like to invite you to speak at our upcoming panel on workplace equity. Your perspective as a business owner and as someone who's experienced bias firsthand would be invaluable. Elena hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her forte, and the idea of sharing her story in front of a large audience was intimidating. But as she thought about the countless messages she had received from people inspired by her actions, she realized this was an opportunity to amplify their voices as well as her own. I'd be honored, she replied, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. The bank takes action. Meanwhile, at Union Savings Bank, the pressure was mounting. The viral nature of Elena's story had placed the institution under intense scrutiny. Corporate executives scrambled to manage the situation, holding emergency meetings to address the public relations nightmare. Michael Hayes, the branch manager, found himself in the middle of it all. While he had initially approached the situation from a position of damage control, his conversations with Elena had sparked something deeper. For the first time, he was forced to confront the biases within the institution he had loyally served for decades. Michael began conducting his own internal review, speaking to employees at all levels of the branch. What he discovered was disheartening but unsurprising. Many of his staff, particularly those from minority backgrounds, shared stories of subtle biases, microaggressions, and double standards. These weren't isolated incidents but symptoms of a larger cultural issue. Determined to make meaningful changes, Michael proposed a series of reforms to the corporate office. These included comprehensive diversity and inclusion training, the creation of an anonymous reporting system for workplace bias, and the establishment of a customer advisory board, with Elena as a suggested member. To his relief, corporate leadership approved his recommendations, though he knew implementation would be the true test of their commitment. The panel. A week later, Elena stood backstage at the panel event, her heart pounding as she prepared to step onto the stage. The room beyond the curtain buzzed with energy, filled with business leaders, advocates, and professionals eager to discuss the challenges and opportunities of creating equitable workplaces. Sophia approached her with a reassuring smile. "You've got this," she said. "Just speak from the heart. Your story is powerful because it's real." Elena nodded, taking a deep breath. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage to a warm round of applause. The moderator introduced her, summarizing the events at the bank and the impact of her story. Elena began by recounting the incident, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She described the humiliation of being treated with suspicion despite her success and the resilience it took to stand her ground. But she didn't dwell on her personal experience. Instead, she pivoted to the broader implications, calling out the systemic biases that allowed such incidents to occur. "This isn't just about one employee at one bank," she said, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "It's about a culture that normalizes these behaviors and dismisses the harm they cause. It's about the need for institutions to take responsibility, not just with words but with actions. Her words were met with nods of agreement and murmurs of support. As she concluded her speech, the applause was thunderous. In the Q&A session that followed, audience members asked thoughtful questions about how businesses could implement the kinds of changes Elena was advocating for. She answered with clarity and conviction, drawing from her experiences as both a business owner and a customer. A new role. Following the panel, Sophia approached Elena with an offer. We're launching a new initiative to partner with businesses on improving equity and inclusion practices, she explained. Your insights would be invaluable. Would you consider joining us as a consultant? Elena was surprised but intrigued. While her primary focus was still her coffee business, she saw this as an opportunity to turn her experience into something constructive. I'd love to, she replied. Over the next few weeks, Elena began working with the organization, helping to develop training programs and strategies for businesses looking to create more inclusive environments. Her work took her to boardrooms and workshops, where she shared her story and challenged others to confront their own biases. Stephen faces the consequences. Back at the bank, Stephen Myers found himself increasingly isolated. The backlash from the incident had tarnished his reputation, and his attempts to defend his actions only made things worse. Michael Hayes eventually called him into his office for a formal meeting. Stephen, Michael began, his tone firm but measured, I've reviewed your actions during the incident with Miss Brooks, and it's clear that your behavior was not only unprofessional but also in violation of our code of conduct. Stephen opened his mouth to protest, but Michael held up a hand. This isn't up for debate. Your actions have damaged the bank's reputation and undermined the trust of our customers. Effective immediately, you are being placed on probation. During this time, you will be required to complete mandatory training on diversity and inclusion, and your performance will be closely monitored. Any further incidents will result in termination. Stephen left the office with his head down, his bravado replaced with a sullen silence. A community united. Elena's story continued to inspire others, sparking conversations not just in corporate offices but in communities across the country. People began sharing their own experiences of bias, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond Union Savings Bank. Her coffee shops became hubs for these conversations, with customers leaving notes of encouragement and sharing ideas for creating more inclusive spaces. Elena even launched a community initiative, offering workshops on equity in entrepreneurship, which quickly gained popularity. One day, as she was closing up one of her shops, a young woman approached her. She was hesitant at first but eventually spoke up. Miss Brooks, I just wanted to thank you, the young woman said. I saw your story online, and it gave me the courage to stand up to my supervisor at work. He was always dismissing me, and I didn't think I could say anything. But you showed me that it's okay to demand respect. I did, and now things are starting to change. Elena smiled warmly. That means so much to me. It's not always easy to stand up for yourself, but it's always worth it. I'm proud of you for speaking out. The encounter reaffirmed Elena's belief that one person's actions could inspire many. Her journey had started with a single moment of disrespect, but it had grown into something much bigger, a movement that was empowering others to demand fairness and dignity in their own lives. The bank's public pledge. Weeks after their second meeting, Union Savings Bank issued a public statement. They acknowledged the incident with Elena, outlined the steps they were taking to address systemic bias, and committed to fostering a culture of inclusion and respect. As part of their pledge, they announced the formation of a Customer Equity Council, with Elena serving as one of its founding members. The statement was met with mixed reactions. Some praised the bank for taking responsibility, while others criticized the move as performative. But Elena saw it as a step in the right direction, one that could pave the way for deeper, more meaningful changes. A full circle moment. Several months later, Elena returned to the bank for the first Customer Equity Council meeting. As she walked through the lobby, she noticed the changes that had been implemented. Signs promoting equity and respect were prominently displayed, and the staff seemed more attentive and welcoming. Michael Hayes greeted her warmly, his demeanor more genuine than ever. "Miss Brooks," he said, shaking her hand, "thank you for being here. Your input has been invaluable in shaping our new direction." Elena nodded, her confidence radiating. "I'm glad to see progress being made. Let's keep it going." As she took her seat at the council table, surrounded by other community leaders and advocates, Elena felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had turned a moment of adversity into an opportunity for growth, not just for herself, but for an entire institution. This was the power of resilience, determination, and the unwavering belief that change was possible. And Elena knew that this was only the beginning. Building bridges. As the months rolled by, Elena's involvement with Union Savings Bank's Customer Equity Council became more than just a role, it was a mission. The council meetings were rigorous, requiring her to navigate corporate bureaucracy while ensuring that the voices of marginalized communities were not just heard but amplified. For Elena, this wasn't merely about fixing the bank's image, it was about creating a framework that could serve as a model for other institutions. A meeting of minds. The next council meeting was held in the bank's newly renovated conference room, an impressive space designed to reflect inclusivity and transparency. Alongside Elena were 10 other members, a mix of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and advocates, each bringing their unique perspectives. The council's chair, a well-respected diversity consultant named Dr. Karen Sanders, opened the meeting with a clear agenda. "We've made strides in revising the bank's policies, but there's still much to do," Dr. Sanders said, her tone firm but encouraging. "Today, I want to focus on actionable changes we can implement immediately, particularly around employee training and community outreach." Elena nodded, flipping through her notes. When her turn came to speak, she outlined a proposal she had been working on for weeks, a mentorship program pairing bank employees with underrepresented youth interested in finance and entrepreneurship. "This isn't just about optics," Elena explained, her voice steady but passionate. "It's about planting seeds for the future. When young people see that they're welcome in spaces like this, when they're mentored by people who believe in their potential, it changes the narrative. It tells them they belong." The room buzzed with approval as council members voiced their support. Michael Hayes, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. "I think this is an excellent idea," he said. "We can start with a pilot program at this branch and, if it's successful, roll it out to other locations." Elena felt a surge of hope. For the first time, she saw real momentum, proof that her efforts were making a tangible difference. Facing resistance. Not everyone welcomed these changes with open arms. Within the bank, there was quiet resistance from some employees, particularly those who viewed the new policies as unnecessary or burdensome. Stephen Myers, still on probation, had become a vocal critic among his peers. "This is overkill," Stephen muttered to a coworker one afternoon. "I've been here for years, and suddenly I'm the bad guy because one customer didn't like how I did my job." His coworker, a younger teller named James, hesitated before responding. "Look, Stephen, I get that you're frustrated, but maybe it's worth thinking about why these changes are happening. It's not just about one incident, it's about making this place better for everyone." Stephen scoffed but said nothing. Deep down, he knew James was right, but admitting that would mean acknowledging his own shortcomings, a step he wasn't ready to take. The mentorship program launch. A month later, the mentorship program Elena had proposed became a reality. The pilot program paired 5 bank employees with high school students from underserved neighborhoods. The launch event was held in the bank's lobby, now adorned with artwork from local artists and a banner that read, "Empowering the Future, Together." Elena was the keynote speaker, addressing an audience of students, parents, and community leaders. Standing at the podium, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. "When I walked into this bank months ago, I never imagined we'd be here today," she began. What started as a moment of pain has turned into an opportunity for growth, not just for me, but for all of us. This program is proof that change is possible when we come together with open hearts and open minds." Her words were met with applause, but what moved her most were the smiles on the faces of the students. For them, this wasn't just a program, it was a chance to see new possibilities for their futures. Stephen's turning point. As part of his probation, Stephen had been assigned to participate in the mentorship program, a move he initially resented. But as he spent time with his mentee, a bright 16-year-old named Malik, something began to shift. Malik was curious, driven, and eager to learn, and his enthusiasm was contagious. One afternoon, as they sat in the break room discussing budgeting, Malik asked a question that caught Stephen off guard. "Mr. Myers, what made you want to work at a bank?" Stephen paused, caught between his habitual cynicism and a genuine desire to give Malik a thoughtful answer. "Well," he said slowly, "I guess I liked the idea of helping people manage their money. It's a way to make a difference, I suppose." Malik nodded, his eyes bright. "That's cool. I want to do that too, help people, I mean." For the first time in months, Stephen felt a spark of purpose. He realized that he had an opportunity not just to teach Malik but to learn from him as well. It was a humbling experience, and though he didn't say it out loud, Stephen knew he owed this change of perspective to Elena. The ripple effect. As the mentorship program gained traction, its impact extended beyond the bank. Local businesses began reaching out, inspired by the initiative and eager to collaborate. Schools expressed interest in integrating financial literacy into their curriculums, and community leaders praised the bank for taking meaningful action. Elena's coffee shops became unofficial hubs for these discussions, hosting workshops and networking events that brought people together. Her role as a mentor and advocate had become just as important as her work as an entrepreneur, and she embraced it fully. One evening, as she was locking up her flagship store, a familiar figure approached her. It was Michael Hayes. "I just wanted to stop by and say thank you," Michael said. "You've done more than anyone to push us in the right direction. I know it hasn't been easy, but I hope you see how much of a difference you've made." Elena smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Michael. But this is just the beginning. There's still so much work to do." Michael nodded. "And we'll keep doing it, together." A movement takes shape. Elena's journey was far from over, but as she reflected on how far she had come, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. What had started as a painful encounter at a bank had grown into something far greater, a movement that was changing lives, building bridges, and paving the way for a more inclusive future. The challenges ahead didn't intimidate her. If anything, they fueled her determination. Elena had learned that true progress wasn't about quick fixes or empty promises, it was about persistence, collaboration, and the courage to demand better. And as she looked toward the future, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. A legacy of change. Months had passed since that fateful day at Union Savings Bank, and Elena's life had transformed in ways she could have never anticipated. What began as a moment of injustice had blossomed into a movement, with ripples of change spreading far beyond the walls of the bank. Yet, for Elena, the journey was far from over. If anything, the momentum only deepened her resolve to ensure the progress they had made wasn't fleeting. A letter from headquarters. One morning, Elena sat in her coffee shop reviewing documents for an upcoming community initiative when her phone buzzed. The email subject line read, "Union Savings Bank Leadership Meeting Invitation." Intrigued, she opened the message. It was an invitation to join a quarterly strategy session with the bank's top executives, a rare opportunity to speak directly to those at the highest levels of decision-making. Elena couldn't help but smile. This was the kind of access she had hoped for, proof that her efforts were being taken seriously. But with the invitation came a sense of responsibility. She knew this wasn't just about her, she was representing everyone who had experienced bias, everyone who had been dismissed or undervalued. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Elena immediately began preparing. She spent hours gathering data, compiling stories from other customers and employees who had reached out to her, and outlining actionable recommendations. She wasn't going to waste this opportunity. The meeting that changed everything. The day of the meeting arrived, and Elena found herself seated at a polished oak table in a towering boardroom overlooking Manhattan. Around her were some of the most influential people in the banking industry, executives in tailored suits, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Michael Hayes, now a vocal advocate for the changes Elena had championed, introduced her to the group. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Miss Elena Brooks is the reason we're here today. Her courage and determination have not only helped us see our shortcomings but have also given us the tools to address them." Elena stood, her confidence radiating as she began her presentation. She started with her own story, not as a complaint but as a case study illustrating the broader systemic issues at play. She then moved on to the data she had collected, statistics on workplace bias, testimonials from customers and employees, and examples of best practices from other industries. "I'm not here to shame this institution," she said, her voice firm but measured. "I'm here to challenge it, to be better, to lead by example, and to set a standard that others will follow." The room was silent as she spoke, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. By the time she finished, even the most skeptical executives looked impressed. One of them, a senior vice president, leaned forward and said, "Miss Brooks, I think I speak for all of us when I say that your insights are invaluable. We'd like to continue this dialogue and explore how we can implement your recommendations across the organization." Elena nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. She had come to the meeting ready to fight, but it seemed her message had already taken root. Stephen's redemption. Meanwhile, back at the bank branch, Stephen Myers was undergoing his own transformation. His probationary period had forced him to confront his biases, and his participation in the mentorship program had opened his eyes in ways he hadn't expected. Malik, his mentee, had become a source of inspiration. The teenager's relentless curiosity and optimism were infectious, challenging Stephen to re-evaluate his own perspective. One afternoon, as they worked on a mock budget together, Malik turned to Stephen and said, "You know, Mr. Myers, you're not as scary as you look." Stephen chuckled, a genuine laugh that felt foreign but good. "I'll take that as a compliment," he replied. For the first time in years, Stephen felt a sense of purpose beyond the rigid routines of his job. He realized that he had the power to make a positive impact, not just on Malik but on every customer who walked through the bank's doors. By the end of the mentorship program, Stephen had not only completed his required training but had also volunteered to lead the next round of mentorship sessions. It was a small step, but one that marked a significant shift in his attitude. Elena's new role. As the weeks went by, Elena's influence continued to grow. She became a sought-after speaker, sharing her story at conferences, corporate events, and community gatherings. Her coffee shops flourished as well, becoming hubs for discussions on equity and inclusion. Customers frequently left notes of gratitude, sharing how her story had inspired them to stand up for themselves or support others in their own communities. One day, while reviewing her schedule, Elena received a call from Sophia Carter, the leader of the advocacy organization she had partnered with. "Elena," Sophia began, "we've been watching the incredible work you've been doing, and we have a proposal for you. We'd like you to join our board of directors. Your experience and insight would be invaluable as we expand our initiatives." Elena was speechless for a moment. The offer was unexpected but deeply meaningful. "I'd be honored," she finally replied. It was another opportunity to amplify her impact, and she was ready to embrace it. A full circle moment. One crisp autumn morning, Elena received an invitation to an event at Union Savings Bank's flagship branch. It was the official launch of the mentorship program she had helped create, now expanded to multiple branches across the city. The event was a celebration of progress, featuring speeches from bank executives, community leaders, and program participants. As Elena entered the building, she was greeted by Michael Hayes, who escorted her to the stage. The room was filled with employees, customers, and members of the community, all gathered to recognize the strides the bank had made. When it was her turn to speak, Elena took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. "When I walked into this bank months ago, I never imagined we'd be here today," she began. "But this isn't just a celebration of what we've accomplished, it's a reminder of what's possible when we refuse to settle for the status quo. Change isn't easy, but it's always worth it." The audience erupted in applause, and Elena felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than just a victory for her, it was a victory for everyone who had ever felt marginalized or overlooked. The legacy. As the event concluded, Elena stayed behind to chat with attendees. One young woman, a newly hired teller, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Miss Brooks," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. I've followed your story from the beginning, and it gave me the courage to apply for this job. I never thought someone like me would have a place in a bank like this, but you changed that." Elena smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You belong here," she said firmly. "And don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." In the months and years that followed, Elena's work continued to inspire change. The mentorship program became a cornerstone of the bank's community outreach efforts, and other institutions began adopting similar models. Elena herself went on to write a book about her journey, sharing the lessons she had learned and the impact of standing up for what's right. Her story became a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and the belief that even the smallest actions can create lasting change. And while the road hadn't been easy, Elena knew she wouldn't have had it any other way. She had turned a moment of adversity into a legacy of progress, and for that, she was profoundly grateful.